have you done your level 1 training? Have you done your foundational? Have you done your proficiency? Have you done your mastery? And a lot of folks are saying, well, look, you're asking me to complete this training. This might be 8, 10, upwards of 40 hours, depending on the complexity of it.
Hey, we need you to take ownership here. We need you to have an enterprise mindset and start to help us also see and show us how you can integrate some of this new technology and to take ownership.
The whole purpose of AI Caravan wasn't for our leaders to give a download of everything they know or everything they expect. It was centered around the fact that this is about what the audience needs. This is about what the audience wants.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry, and this is a show about building cultures of learning inside companies. Joining me today is the Director of L&D at Publicis Sapient, Ian Stevens. So, mandates, low completion rates, crickets. Does this sound familiar? Today, we're going to talk to Ian to unpack a simple truth. Tool rollouts fail when culture and skills lag. Ian shares how he pivoted from prescriptive training to real experimentation, building adaptability, resilience, and judgment first, then scaling skills through hands-on forum. In this episode, you're going to learn about going from writer to editor and why AI shifts that core skill set. The AI Caravan, these 60-minute demos and Q&As, 60 minutes of networking that resulted in massive engagement for them at a minimal cost, just the price of pizza and beer. You're also going to learn about guardrails versus freedom and how they widen the lanes and unlock momentum for Ian's team. You're going to learn about measuring impact without killing the vibe, crucially important, why the eyeball test is still relevant, and how hackathons and usage signals can reinforce that eyeball feeling. And finally, a take on what the future of org design looks like. Think pod-based teams, blurred lines, complementary skills. This is the real life experience from the front lines of a company embracing the AI revolution head on. If you feel stuck in the sort of hurrying up and waiting approach for AI, then this episode is your playbook. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Ian Stevens. Ian, welcome to the show.
Excellent, Andrew. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to a conversation.
Yeah, me too. You and I connected a few months ago online, and we connected over a kind of mutual fascination, I think, with the kind of mindset shift that needs to take place. And you're clearly seeing it there at Publicis. And am I saying that right, by the way? Publicis?
Yeah, Publicis.
Okay, cool. And when we spoke, you said to me that your chief product officer came to you about 18 months ago and said, we need our people to start showing up differently. Like, Ian, figure this out, basically, right? What did that mean to you? What was that conversation like? And what has transpired since then?
Yeah. I won't forget when this was probably a couple months after OpenAI really became a big deal, and everybody was talking about GPTs and this new generative AI conversation. Coming from an organization with a tech background, AI and machine learning wasn't anything new, but now the pace of change was just going to be wildly different. And the impact on our people and how we lean into that was going to be different. And we knew it was going to be a disruptor. And I think, where our chief product officer really kind of put to us was to say, look, we've had people that have been deeply ingrained in the work that they've done. We have people working across the spectrum of things that now could potentially be irrelevant or automated. And so how do we get our people to come into their roles, not just thinking about what do I need to do today, but what can I possibly do tomorrow? And start to identify ways that they can start to really bring the Gen AI tool sets into their work as a means to build more efficacy, to accelerate value for clients, a whole variety of things. And to your point, when you showed up and just said, we want our people to show up differently, I kind of sat there and I said, okay, we might need to unpack that a little bit.
Right.
There's a lot of things that could encompass. So what does that mean? And I think, when we started on this journey, it felt a little bit tool centric. It was kind of like, we need them to learn the tools. We need them to understand what's out there. We need them to dive into the applications. And I think what we've learned over time was, it's not the tool sets, the skill sets, they come along. But how do you start and kind of work towards mindset shifts? And when we talk about, whether it's organizational culture, whether it is the overall growth and success of an organization, or whether it's just helping your people feel like they still have a place in the organization, all those elements tied together.
Yeah. And another kind of scene setting question is, you mentioned that you have to make this shift from people feeling like transformation was happening to them, so they were like bought into this and were part of it. And so could you share a little bit about what you were hearing in the organization that made you first realize, like, oh wow, people have this feeling of it happening to them?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I would assume we're not the only organization that's gone through this, where I think even our leadership was reactive, right? You try to stay ahead of the curve. You try to think of everything that's important, but you're in a position where you're kind of torn on this is change at a pace that nobody's ever seen before. And now you're talking about, how do you actually keep your people ahead of the curve? And for us, it meant a lot of kind of top down, mandatory, check the box, like, have you completed this training? Have you completed that training? And I think it caused a lot of fatigue, right? A lot of change fatigue, because there wasn't ever really a conversation to say, like, here's why, here's everything that we think is beneficial for you. Here's what we see as you being a part of our future. Here's what we think is going to be really important as we evolve as an organization, and wanting to carry you along with us as an organization. Instead, it was kind of like, have you done your level 1 training? Have you done your foundational? Have you done your proficiency? Have you done your mastery? And a lot of folks, they're saying, well, look, you're asking me to complete this training. This might be 8, 10, upwards of 40 hours, depending on the complexity of it. Oh, and by the way, you're still asking me to put in 40 hours a week on client work. So how do I create that balance for myself? What am I supposed to prioritize? How many different avenues was that training coming in from? So you didn't have a consistent narrative. It was somebody coming from capability to say, here's your technical skill. You have somebody coming from an industry standpoint saying, you need to know what the future trends are going to look like in our client landscape. You have leadership and people management coming in and saying, this is what it means to lead in the age of AI, which is kind of funny in and of itself, because I don't know if we've fully figured out what that means yet, but we're working on it. That's the classic, flying the plane as you go, building it as you fly around.
Yeah. So, and so I'm wondering if the part of this mindset, because I hear this quite a lot, is yes, like, we want to acknowledge that people feel like it's been done to them, and so they don't have a say, they're not bought into it, and clarifying expectations of everything you just described. But also, is there a part of it that says, like, hey, we need you to take ownership here. We need you to have an enterprise mindset and start to help us also see and show us how you can integrate some of this new technology and to take ownership.
I think, yeah. And I think we finally gotten to a point where we're really creating an environment that empowers people to do that. I think, one of the things that we found ourselves doing was out training our tool sets. So when you've got these things and you're trying to tell everybody, hey, look at all these cool things you can do. And then they get to the tool set that's made available to them when you're working in a large or enterprise, and there's concerns around security, and there's concerns around client data, and there's concerns around just about everything. You're almost being told to hurry up and wait. because there wasn't a clear path between this is what you've asked me to do from a training perspective, but then either the tool set can't deliver on that, or the work that I have to do to clean up whatever I want to work on is before I can put it into that AI tool to help. I'd rather just do it myself. And so you saw some resistance through that lens. And the way that it really manifested itself was, despite the mandates, despite the number of emails that came through to get people to complete things, we just weren't seeing the engagement. We weren't seeing the adoption. We weren't seeing the completions happen. And, I think it was a pretty good, wake up call for us to say, all right, we probably need to shift this a little bit, or we at least need to contextualize it so that people understand why we're doing this and what might the broader journey actually look like in the long run.
Yeah. I know many folks listening are going to be like, well, so what did he do? What was the response? And we're going to get there. I want to continue just to set the scene a little bit for others who are looking for a hook into this. How much of what you, and maybe this was in the mandates and maybe it changed as you started implementing training, how much of it was focused on tool adoption and how much of it was like how to work with the tool? So more like capabilities and skills.
It varied somewhat capability by capability. So if I think of engineers, it was probably more about tool adoption and some sense of mindset in terms of how to use the tool. And I say that because it was, okay, well, how do you code? How do you use something like GitHub Copilot, or in our case, how would you use Slingshot as a vehicle to accelerate the rate that you can produce? For a lot of our other capabilities, it was, and I think this had its own set of challenges, to be fair. So even when you're trying to get people to think about how to adopt a tool or how to think differently with a tool set, we kind of said, okay, so identify some workflows and start to think about where there's clutter in the workflow that you wish could be done more efficiently. Where is it that things could be done more effectively? What are some of the habits that eat up a lot of your time or eat up a lot of other people's time, and what are ways that you can start to incorporate using AI tool sets to help reduce that, and so thinking through that, and people kind of saying like, well, I know how to do what I do, but I don't know how to tell a machine to do what I do. I don't know how to effectively kind of do that and then look at what the outputs are and evaluate those outputs, which meant that it became a shift away. If I think about it from a classic standpoint, it's like growing from being a writer to an editor. You're kind of going from that content creation space to that content evaluation space.
Did any like particular skills or capabilities bubble up as more important, where you were like, oh, we need to roll this out to more people?
I think for us, what the first piece that we really kind of started to think about was how do we look at adaptability? How do we look at resilience? How do we look at change agility? How do you get people in the right mindset away from kind of, being in a state of kind of fight, flight, or freeze, at the pace at which things are coming to them, and how do they start to kind of embrace it and shift with the changing times? From there, I think you have people in the right mind space to say, okay, I can, reskill. I can unlearn what I already know. I can try to kind of build on what I might have for a foundation based on having completed some of this training. And now how does that look like in terms of getting my hands on things? And so now much more of a strong focus on things like critical thinking, systems thinking, even working closely to talk about making judgments. Like how do you judge something? How do you make it? Decision making in that case to say, yeah, this is good or this is good enough, and I'm ready to move it along.
Yeah, and do you feel like you cracked those, or do you think it's like, what did you learn in building those? You could like feel free to pick one of them or just broad lessons.
Yeah. Gosh, I think
because it's hard, right?
Yeah, and I think, I look, we're far from perfect, and
Yeah.
we're far probably from being perfectly there at this point. I think it's still a lesson, as we go through this, to say, all right, how do we ensure that we're continuing to kind of say, like, the status quo isn't okay. We need to be able to move forward. We need to be able to advance. But we need to provide some of the guardrails for people to operate in. And I think that was, the guardrails were too narrow to start. And it was kind of like you have this very prescriptive thinking, which, folks thought, okay, great. If we over-index on the prescriptive thinking, this is what you do, this is how you do it. People will kind of on their own be able to abstract from that and figure out how to grow the skill set. And what I think it was is it's almost like thinking about how do you teach kids how to do things, right? And how do how is it that kids learn? Kids learn by, with their hands. They learn by failure. They learn by, working through frustration. They learn by, actually being able to create. And so, when we started to kind of think, and I would say, we hit a pivot point somewhere in the middle of this year to say, all right, what are the things that we can do that provide spaces for people to experiment? What are the things that we can do to give people an opportunity to collaborate with their peers? Where is it that we have the opportunity to create forums where people can ask questions and feel like they're doing so in a space where they're not going to be judged for the nature or the quality of their question? To really give them that psychologically safe space, so to speak, to really embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah. This feels like a good time to bring in your AI Caravan concept, right?
Yeah.
So let's unpack that, because I think, what is it? How does it work in practice?
Yeah, so AI Caravan was, the brainchild of a couple of my team members based in Colombia. They were looking specifically at engineering. It served dual purpose for us initially, where it was bringing some of our people together, but they were made public events. And so they brought people in from outside the organization. It gave us a chance to demo some of our tool sets, some of the products that we're putting out for clients. We had senior leaders invested. It was just a very demo oriented, just kind of giving people a sense of all that's possible, right? And getting them inspired to want to kind of talk more, engage more, practice more. And I had some conversations with leadership in the Americas, and we had some conversation with some of the folks in LATAM that had been a part of it. And what we decided is to say, look, this concept is fantastic. And, if you think back to kind of American history and this idea of caravans moving across to the West as they explored and pioneered new territory, we thought that it was a perfect symbolism for what we were trying to do as we move into pioneering and a new technology. And so, really simply at its surface level, AI Caravan was just meant to be an opportunity to bring people together, to have them have a shared conversation, to receive shared information. I think we talk about that pivot from transformation happening to people to transformation happening with people. The whole purpose of AI Caravan wasn't for our leaders to give a download of everything they know or everything they expect. It was centered around the fact that this is about what the audience needs. This is about what the audience wants. And so, yeah, we provided guardrails to say, look, hey, we want you to talk about what's important for AI in the organization. We want you to talk about our product set and how we believe they're going to add value for clients. And that turned into, instead of being a 30-minute presentation, turned into about 10 minutes of content and 20 minutes of Q&A. And, overwhelmingly, the feedback is, as I was walking around at the reception afterwards, was, this is what we needed. This is what I've been waiting for. These are the moments that actually really help me understand, what I can do. And so we had our first one in Boston, the first one. So I hosted the first one here in Boston, and we structured it. We had our head of engineering for financial services. He opened up the conversation. We brought in a couple of different teams, one that talked about, the role within design systems of our products and tool sets. The other actually went in a slightly different direction and just talked about how they used our tools to build a meeting manager. So this was completely out of the blue. And they just said, hey, look, we wanted to create an agent that you could run in real time while you're running a meeting. You'd put the objectives into the agent, and it basically would give you a rundown about, as you're going through, have I hit the objectives that I set out to for this meeting? And what was great about that was it made AI not something for just engineers or product people or delivery. It made something where HR professionals, finance professionals, operations teams, like they all saw something that would be of value to them, right? And I think that was really powerful about it, because it didn't feel like okay, AI's for the coders or AI's for the product managers. It was like AI's for everybody, and really landed that message well. And since then, we've done one in Chicago and we have one in New York next week.
Wow, that's really cool. So for folks listening who want to adopt something like this, can we break it down? Like, how would you go about setting up one of these? If you had to tell me, and my questions are around how do you theme this thing? Is it programmatic? Like, am I building a series of these things? How do you decide I think it's open enrollment, but is there, completion sort of score for people? Yeah. Where do we begin here?
So for the first one, which is we've gotten through one, the idea was twofold. It was we had two objectives that we were trying to do. One is, how do we bring people into the office to have a shared space and be able to meet and greet, right? Obviously, is the RTO thing, and kind of it's that 3-letter acronym's become a 4-letter word in a lot of organizations. And what we've attempted to do is just say, how do we provide experiences that are meaningful for people, that become a pull to come into the office, not a you must be there just to be compliant. That was kind of number one. Number two was to inspire and get people excited about the potential for AI and the growth of the organization. And so I think the idea is, whenever you're starting an event like this, start with just some very broad kind of objectives. Think of things that are not really granular pieces of information, and make sure that you're keeping it audience centered. So they're going to get all the presentations. They're going to have the town halls. They're going to hear, be in the all hands with their capability groups or their functional teams. And in all of those, they're going to say, this is what you need to do. This is the shift your role is going to make, all of those things. And those are all company point of view downward. This was really meant to be a crowdsourcing and bring people together to say, let's have a conversation about it. Here's a little bit of information. How can we help? And, I think just having that point of view initially was really helpful in getting that off the ground. Second is, create social collateral around it. So there were cards. We had a bingo game, so to speak, where there was a reception afterwards. People put down 3 names of people that they talked to about AI while they were at the reception. There was a QR code for them to take a selfie. So, we started to build some of photo repositories and kind of build some buzz that way. And then we drew names out of a hat for a few Amazon gift cards, hey, everybody that completes the bingo card, you'll go into a raffle. The last piece was, how do you build a feedback loop? So what is, not your traditional survey to track attendance, to mark completion. And in fact, what I would tell you is, we did a horrible job. I couldn't tell you. We had over 120 people in the Boston office, and I don't know who all was there. We didn't track it. Didn't care. What we saw was what we needed to see, right? Sometimes it's the eyeball test of, we had a bunch of people there. It was twice as many people as I think we had really ever had in the office at one point in time since COVID. So you're talking about, it was something that people honestly wanted to be a part of. And they're engaged. And we didn't get through all the questions. That was the other piece. We we didn't draw this out to be a 3-hour thing. We didn't draw this out. This was 60 minutes of kind of engagement and then 60 minutes of network. And that's really how we framed it for that first go around. And like I said, the survey at the end was, here are what would you want if we started to do this more often? What else would you want to hear about? What else would you want to see? What else would you want to know about? And so collected a ton of rich feedback from both the Boston and Chicago offices that we're going to take and probably make this a quarterly event series moving forward.
I like it. And how do you think about now the measuring of the impact of this? Like you said, like it passes the eyeball test, and I think that's great. And if you have good relationships with your leadership, they can buy into that as well, right? And so everyone's happy. But ultimately, to justify continued investment, you've got to show the ROI, right? We all have to. So how do you think about that and measuring that behavior change? What are you looking for?
So I think coming out, as I said, the last of the first, so to speak, will be next week. Or actually, no, it's this week. It's tomorrow. I probably should get my calendar right. But I think, what we're going to do is so, for example, we had our head of engineering for financial services lead the one in Boston. Our chief product officer is running the one. It ran the one in Chicago. One of our North America heads of engineering is running the one in New York. So not only do I have the eyeball test to see how did people show up, how did people engage, but we're also debriefing with them after every session to say, what was your impression? How did you feel about the group that was there? How did you feel about the questions? Building on this, what do you think we can do moving forward? And so, the goal will be now is to say, as we head into 2026 and we look at Q1, how are we changing the structure a little bit in a way that still gives people what they want and starts to work towards that ROI. So we're looking at considering hackathons, kind of really probably more use-a-thon than hackathon. How do people kind of create concepts for light agents? Partnering people that don't necessarily have the technical acumen with those that do to kind of partner to come up with some of those ideas and kind of pitch those ideas and prototype those ideas. There's, obviously ongoing conversations around, what are, encouraging people to have rituals within their teams around what did they do? What did they learn? But I think when we talk about, things that are very traceable and much more easily measured is, what do we see that's different about engagement? What do we see that's different around, data on our tools usage? What do we see that's different around, the types of ideas that are coming in? Because the other thing we don't know, as much as we saw, okay, people aren't completing a learning, for example, what we also weren't really seeing was like, okay, what does engagement look like? What are people doing on their own? How are people excited about this? And so starting to capture some of that, even if it's anecdotal data at times, asking folks to say, okay, and really capture what's one thing you didn't do before today that you're going to do tomorrow. And how will you know that that's something that you'll apply and kind of have follow-ups with those groups further down the road? So we're still exploring. I'm open to any suggestions if anybody wants to talk about it. But I think, it's an evolution that we're trying to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, I think the idea of a usathon or hackathon is very smart. It's sort of the proof of work piece is there, right? Like you're going to see there, like what quality of output you're getting. Be interesting to see how, if you do a number of those, how that improves over time as you do more of these caravan roadshows.
And then the next piece, which I think is going to be more challenging, is how do you do it? How do you reach people who may not have a home office? How do you do it in a hybrid setting? How do you do it in a purely virtual setting? I think that's, we did it entirely localized. So, there's a scale issue there, right? And that's something else that we're going to kind of think through is what does that mean when you may not have people in the office? And our India team did this phenomenal event about a month ago or so ago, I guess at this point, called Learnfinity. And they did 3 days in our Gurgaon office, 3 full days in our Bangalore office, where they just had all sorts of hands-on things. They had speaker sessions. They had just this large mix of different things. And so we're looking at kind of like, not just having the AI Caravan as a standalone event, but can we do something like those kind of learning days with a little bit of a theme to it, get people kind of excited, give them the full day to just kind of for themselves to be able to grow, to be able to learn, to be able to get insights, with that AI Caravan kind of being the culmination at the end of the day of kind of the social and the more fun piece.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. This is reminding me a lot of the Pixar. In the book Creativity Inc., the founder of Pixar talks about this, their approach to, they all like ran, I forget what they were called now. It was like a whole chapter on it, these like themed events, and people, it was all on site, and everyone would get involved in it and have like a suggestion box and ideas and stuff for it beforehand. And it was very much like run by the people for the people kind of thing, but all focused on learning. And you get all these awesome benefits, like you've said, around like networking and the cross-functional connections, and then all the ideas and innovations that are coming out of it.
And I think, to come back to your ROI question, one of the things, and look, I wouldn't have a job if we weren't ever able to provide the return on what we're trying to do here. But I think sometimes you have to be okay with with kind of pushing back and not defining that, because I think, for the same reasons that, you have had traditionally just rigid metrics and things that kind of tie into the work that somebody's doing and how does that change and all of that. When you're looking at mindset shifts, there's a cultural engagement shift that takes place with that. And if you're keeping people in a transactional type of environment with where your transformation is meant to go, meaning they don't feel a part of it, they feel like they're on the outside looking in, they feel like, the company has its agenda and that's the direction it's going. And if you don't get on the bus, you're going to get left behind. And this was about flipping that and saying, look, we want you all to come on the bus, and we want you to drive the bus for this, and we want you to, choose where we stop along the way. And we as leaders are the ones that are just here along for the ride to kind of answer any questions you have as we go on this journey. And I think just kind of reversing that dynamic was a huge part of what made this successful.
Mm-hmm. And it's very also worth saying this isn't the only thing you're doing to drive this adoption and to answer the CPO question that we talked about at the beginning, right? So it's part of a bigger picture, and it does complement the more traditional learning really, really well. And like you said, it's okay to be a little bit more like flexible and to go with what people want. Yeah, I love it. I think it's a really cool idea.
And quite frankly, you talk about ROI. It was cheap. We bought pizza, we bought beer, and we had people come to an office that they're already a part of that was, kind of traditionally part of their commute. So you're not talking about this, flying people from all over the country to come in together and bringing in vendors or partners and speakers and all of that. You're using what you've got in grassroots.
Yeah. It just goes back to the culture of experimentation, right?
Exactly.
You're leading by example. Yeah. Okay, so this is awesome. I think there's a ton that folks can walk away with here that's practical. I want to end off on one question that zooms out again to look at the bigger picture here. And this one is a more speculative thing. So it's really like, what's your hot take on this? Because no one knows, obviously. But we talked a little bit about how, not in this conversation, but you and I have talked about how like product managers are learning to code and engineers are learning to design. And there's this like, thanks to AI, this blurring of cross-functional lines. And I'm curious if you have a take on what the org chart of the future looks like. And yeah, I mean, what does your gut say? What do you see in the crystal ball?
So I guess I can only speak for organizations a little bit more similar to myself, but I think you're really going to be looking at, these kind of product deployment pods that, are able to kind of work together in smaller groups to kind of align and have that lead that kind of aligns people with the right skill sets, right? if you think of, I don't know if you were ever like a role-playing gamer or anything like that, but it was kind of like you have to have the wizard and you have to have the fighter and you have to have like, the elf or whatever that grouping of things are, but because of what their traditional skills might have looked like. But it wasn't about where their individual skill sets were. It's about how they complemented each other when they came to the table. And so I think, people have talked about the skills economy for a while, but it's always been kind of within the silo of somebody's responsibility. And I think now you're going to see a blurring of the lines of what those skills taxonomies look like. What is data analysis? What does data literacy look like? And how do those play out between somebody in product or somebody in design or somebody in engineering? And I think, yes, there probably will always be some semblance of structure around, okay, this is the role that these people technically play. But I think you're going to see a lot more effort going to casting teams that truly complement one another to be able to deliver for a client.
Yeah. I think I agree with you that it goes to more like decentralized, like the use of the word pods. It goes to these sort of decentralized teams focused on a product or a feature or a customer segment that it's almost, they're still specialists, but there's an almost like generalist skill set that you, like you said, is sort of covered with the combination of people in the team, and each team could look different. I think that standardization and hierarchies kind of flatten.
100%. 100%. And we're seeing now even and I think, what I would tell anybody is, by the way, it's also going to be bumpy when you do that. It's not going to be smooth. You still have people that have their fiefdoms and they have the things that they feel like they're responsible for. And regardless of how well they've been able to integrate tool sets or be able to all be on the same kind of playing field from a skill set, it's still going to be a challenge for, at times for people to really kind of understand how to work together in the new world. It's not even about the roles. It's those ways of working become so fundamentally different in a lot of ways.
Yet another call for a look at how people work and the sort of human elements and the skills that we talked about. So, yeah, Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to share the experience that you have there and what you guys are learning and being open about the fact that you're still learning. I think that's such an important part of this as well. So thanks for coming on the show.
Andrew, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.